I found the proof in the basement that revealed what really happened to my mother. That diary exposed the truth my father had hidden for years along with her body. When I read those pages, I understood I would be next. Hello, my dear friends. What a joy to talk with you today. I'm Eleanor Ellie Matthews, but everyone here in Millfield, Kentucky calls me Grandma Ellie. I'm 78 years young with a heart full of stories to share. I was born in Pine Grove, West Virginia, but life brought me here many years ago, and this is where I've made my little corner of peace. Today, what brings me the most joy is writing my books. I've published 3 of them. They're stories about rural life, traditions that are disappearing, tales that deserve to be remembered. I started writing when my grandson Benjamin was born, almost 20 years ago. He was about to come into this world, and I, with my head bubbling with memories, decided I needed to put everything I'd lived through on paper so he could know his roots. At first, they were just notes in school notebooks, but my son William, an English teacher, encouraged me to turn them into real books. I write here in my simple study, with a window overlooking the backyard. I have my little wooden desk, my well-sharpened pencils — I never liked pens — and my notebooks. This is where stories come to life, where memories become words, where the past meets the present. Oh, before I continue, I'd like to ask you a favor. If you enjoy my story, click that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps this grandma continue sharing her stories. And you, my dears who are watching right now, tell me in the comments, which little town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or at night with a cup of tea? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a circle of kindness. Today I'm going to tell you a story I've never put in any of my books, a story about a basement, a diary, and a truth that needed tremendous courage to come to light. It's not easy to talk about this, but as we say here in Millfield, a word kept inside is like a wound closed on the outside, but bleeding on the inside. And maybe this story can help someone going through difficult times, because even in the darkest situations, truth always finds a way to appear. Let's go back in time, to when I was just a girl from Pine Grove, living in a house where silence weighed more than words. I was born in a simple wooden house on the edge of the road, cutting through Pine Grove. Our house sat on a large plot of land, with an apple tree in the back and chickens scratching around the red dirt yard. It was a small 3-room house, the living room that also served as a kitchen, my parents' bedroom, and the smaller room where I slept. But there was another place in the house that no one mentioned without lowering their voice: the basement. My father, Arthur Matthews, worked at the sawmill in town. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and calloused hands, always with the smell of sawdust impregnated in his clothes. Before my mother's death, he would even smile occasionally, especially on Sundays when we returned from church. After she was gone, his smile dried up like a plant without water. My mother, Clara Wilson Matthews, was a talented seamstress. The brides-to-be in the region lined up for her to sew their wedding dresses. She had long, dark hair, which she tied in a low bun when she bent over her sewing. She was a quiet woman, of few words, but her eyes spoke volumes. Especially when she looked at my father. I was an only child. In our region, it was strange for a family to have just one child, but my mother would say, God wanted it that way. I only understood the true reason much later. I grew up playing alone, inventing imaginary friends, talking to the rag dolls my mother sewed for me. My best friend was Jenny, a doll with wool hair who accompanied me everywhere. Our routine was simple. Daddy left early for the sawmill before the sun even rose. Mama took care of the house in the morning and sewed in the afternoon. I helped how I could, sweeping the yard, feeding corn to the chickens, hanging clothes on the line. At night, after supper, Daddy would listen to the radio while Mama finished some sewing by the light of the kerosene lamp. I played quietly on the floor with Jenny and other dolls. At school, I was a good student. I loved learning, especially when Miss Josephine told stories from books. She said I had a way with words, that one day I would be a writer. I remember turning red with embarrassment, but inside, my heart leaped with joy at the idea. Sundays were special days. We would go to church in the morning, then have Sunday dinner with fried chicken and cornbread that my mother prepared. In the afternoon, sometimes Daddy would take us for ice cream in the town square, or we'd visit Aunt Martha, my mother's sister, who lived on the other side of town. These were happy moments that I cherish like precious coins in a safe. Everything changed when I was 9 years old. I remember the day as if it were yesterday. It was a Tuesday with heavy rain, the kind that turns a tin roof into a drum. Daddy came home earlier than usual from the sawmill, soaked and with an expression I had never seen before. "Where's your mother?" he asked in a strange voice. I told him she was in the basement, getting some fabric she kept there. The basement. It was a damp, dark place under the house. It had a wooden staircase that creaked with each step. Mama kept her boxes of fabrics, threads, and some old furniture we no longer used there. I didn't like going down there. The musty smell gave me sneezing fits, and the shadows seemed to move when the kerosene lamp swayed. Daddy rushed down the basement stairs. I stood frozen in the kitchen, clutching Jenny to my chest. I heard a muffled scream, then silence. A silence that seemed to weigh tons. After what felt like an eternity, Daddy came up the stairs carrying my mother in his arms. She was pale, with a nasty cut on her leg. "There was an accident," he said, his voice trembling. "Your mother cut herself on a rusty nail." That same day, we took Mama to the only doctor in town, Dr. Albert. But it was already too late. The infection was very fast, they said. "Tetanus," explained the doctor with complicated words I didn't quite understand. In 3 days, my mother was gone. I remember the simple coffin in our living room, the women praying, the strong smell of candles and flowers, and I remember my father's look, a look that mixed pain with something else, something I would only be able to name years later. After the funeral, life was never the same. Daddy became different. He started drinking almost every night. Sometimes he would disappear and return only at dawn. And he began to get angry over the smallest things. If the food wasn't the way he wanted it, if I took too long to answer a question, if he found one of my dolls out of place. That's when the punishments began. Small at first, going without supper, not being allowed to go out to play. But soon came the others, the worst ones, and always in the same place, the basement. "Go think about what you've done," he would say, pushing me into that darkness that smelled of damp earth and bad memories. The first time I was locked down there, I cried all night hugging Jenny. Over time, I learned to stay very quiet, not to make noise so as not to irritate him even more. In our small town, people commented quietly about how sad it was to see the poor widower raising his daughter alone. Aunt Martha even tried to take me to live with her, but Daddy wouldn't allow it. "She's my daughter. I take care of her," he said, in a voice that didn't allow discussion. And so we remained, just the two of us in that house that seemed bigger and emptier each day, with my mother's ghost in the hallways and a secret buried in the shadows of the basement. When I turned 13 in 1960, things got worse in a way I never imagined possible. I remember that day there was no party, no cake, no happy birthday. Aunt Martha showed up with a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. It was a dress sewn by her, a little bigger than I needed, to last, as she said. Daddy sat in the kitchen chair, silent, observing everything with those eyes that seemed to hold storms. After Aunt Martha left, he called me to the table. 13 years, he said, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "You're becoming just like your mother." That, which should have sounded like a compliment, came from his mouth as if it were an accusation. It was the first time I felt real fear. Not the fear of punishments, which I already knew well, but a different fear, one that froze my blood. That night, he sent me to the basement because of a glass I broke while washing dishes. But this time was different. He didn't just push me down the stairs and lock the door. He came down with me, lit the old kerosene lamp, and hung it on a hook on the wall. "From now on, the lessons will be different," he said, removing the belt from his pants. The sound of the metal buckle still echoes in my nightmares, even after so many years. The discipline, as he called it, lasted what seemed like an eternity. When he finally climbed the stairs and closed the door, I remained down there, huddled on the cold floor, hugging my old Jenny, the only silent witness to my suffering. I cried quietly until I fell asleep, with my back burning and my heart more hurt than my body. From that day on, the basement became the setting for my worst nightmares. Anything became a reason. A school assignment not done right, rice that was overcooked, a word poorly placed, and off I went for lessons in the basement. Daddy always said the same thing. "You're weak and careless, just like your mother." And then came that strange look, as if he were seeing someone who wasn't me. At school, I started to become quieter. The other girls talked about dances, about boys, about the dresses they wanted to have sewn for the town festival, while I only thought about how to return home without making noise, how to be invisible. Miss Josephine noticed my change. "What's happening, Eleanor?" she would sometimes ask. But I would just shake my head and say everything was fine. What could I say? Who would believe me? It was around this time that I met Dorothy, a new girl at school. She had come from Charleston with her family and sat next to me in class. Unlike the others, Dorothy didn't talk about dances or boys. She liked to read, to tell stories, to imagine other worlds. She was the first person who didn't look at me as if I were strange when I stayed quiet. She would simply leave a book on my desk and say, "Read this, you'll like it." Gradually, Dorothy became my only friend. She never asked about the bruises on my arms when the sleeves of my uniform rolled up unintentionally. She never questioned why I always made excuses not to go to her house to play. Somehow, she knew how to respect my silence. On my 14th birthday, Dorothy gave me a present that would change my life forever. A hard-covered diary, dark green, with a small golden lock. "For you to keep your secrets," she said, placing the little key in my hand. Sometimes, when we can't speak, writing helps. I hid the diary under the thin mattress of my bed. At night, after Daddy fell asleep, I would light a candle stub and write. I wrote about the fear, about the pain, about the unanswered questions that hammered in my head. Why had my mother died so quickly after cutting herself? Why had Daddy changed so much? Why did he always say I was just like her with that voice full of anger? And mainly, what had really happened on that rainy day in the basement? It was in this diary that I began to record my suspicions. The stories didn't add up. Aunt Martha once let slip that my mother wanted to leave Pine Grove, go back to her family in Wheeling. Dr. Albert always seemed uncomfortable when he met me on the street. And there was my father's look, that look that mixed guilt and anger when he watched me sleeping, thinking I didn't notice. The diary became my confidant, my escape valve. I wrote about the lessons in the basement, which became increasingly frequent and severe. About how he began to lock me down there, handcuffed to an old pipe on the wall, sometimes for hours, sometimes all night. "To learn to be obedient," he said. The metallic sound of the handcuffs closing around my thin wrists still wakes me in the middle of the night, even after so many decades. The worst were the words. The blows hurt, yes, but they healed. His words, however, remained embedded in my soul like thorns. "Your mother thought she could leave me, humiliate me in front of everyone. Look what happened to her. And you're following the same path with that way you have of defying me." One particularly bad afternoon, after a lesson that left me unable to sit properly for days, I was locked in the basement for hours. When I finally heard his footsteps moving away and the front door slamming, a sign that he had gone out to the bar, I began looking for a way to loosen the handcuff that held me to the pipe. That's when I noticed a loose brick in the wall, near the floor, a few inches from where I was sitting. I stretched out my foot and poked at the brick, just to pass the time, to have something to focus on besides the pain and fear. To my surprise, the brick gave way easily, revealing a small hole in the wall. Using my toes, I managed to widen the opening enough to see something inside. A package wrapped in plastic, carefully hidden. I twisted my body to the limit of what the handcuff allowed, and after several painful attempts, managed to pull the package out with my toes. Even in the dim light of the basement, I immediately recognized what it was. A notebook with a worn cover, similar to those my mother used to note down her clients' measurements. My heart almost stopped. There, in my hands, was my mother's diary. The diary that would reveal the truth my father had tried to bury with her. With trembling hands and my heart beating so hard it seemed about to burst from my mouth, I opened my mother's diary. The pages yellowed by time, and the dampness of the basement had handwriting I immediately recognized. Those elongated E's, the dots on the I's, always slightly shifted to the right. It was my mother's handwriting, without a doubt. The first page had a date from 10 years before, when I was still very small. Today, Arthur yelled at Eleanor because of spilled milk. I had to place myself between them. His eyes got that way that gives me chills. I don't know how much longer I can take it. I swallowed hard. I had never imagined the problems had started so early. As I leafed through the pages, a horror story unfolded before my eyes. My mother, Clara, was not the quiet and submissive woman I remembered. She fought in her own silent way. She planned. She dreamed of an escape. I talked with Martha today. She said I can stay at her house with the girl until we can get back to Wheeling. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't have the courage, but I think she suspects. The bruises are difficult to hide in this heat. Another entry, a few months later. Arthur found the money I was saving. I've never seen him so furious. He spent the entire night reminding me that I belong to him, that I will never leave this house except in a coffin. Eleanor heard everything, poor thing. I found her under the bed with her doll, trembling. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't stop reading. Each page revealed a more painful truth than the last. My mother hadn't cut herself on a rusty nail. She hadn't died of tetanus. The truth was much more terrible. In the last entry, dated the day of the storm, the handwriting was shakier, almost illegible in some parts. Today is the day. I packed our things in a small bundle, just the essentials. Martha will meet us at the bus stop at noon. Arthur is at the sawmill. When he returns, we'll already be far away. I know he'll look for us, but Wheeling is big enough for us to hide, and my brother Robert promised to help. God forgive me, but I can't live like this anymore, in constant fear, watching my daughter grow up in this environment. What he does to me in the basement, the lessons as he calls them. No woman should endure this, and I'm afraid of what might happen to Eleanor when she gets older. Sometimes, the way he looks at her. The last page was stained, as if it had been wet and then dried. Only later did I realize they were tears, my mother's tears, now mixed with my own. He came back early, found the bundle. He's furious like I've never seen. He's dragging me to the basement. I managed to bring this diary with me, hidden in the pocket of my apron. If something happens to me, whoever finds this, please protect my Eleanor. He won't stop. He will... The sentence ended there, in a shaky line that went off the page. It was the last thought my mother recorded before. I couldn't breathe for a few seconds. It was as if all the air had been sucked from the basement. My father wasn't just a man embittered by the loss of his wife. He was her murderer. And all this time, I had been living with the monster who killed my mother, suffering the same kind of abuse she suffered, locked in the same basement where she took her last breath. At that moment, something changed inside me. The fear didn't disappear. In fact, it became even more intense, but now there was something else along with it. Anger. A cold, calculating anger I had never felt before. and along with the anger, a fierce determination. I would not have the same fate as my mother. I would not die in that basement. But I was handcuffed to a pipe, with my ankle swollen from the last lesson, in an isolated house on the outskirts of a town where no one questioned the poor widower. How would I escape? I heard footsteps in the upper part of the house. Daddy had returned. Quickly, I hid the diary under my skirt and dried my tears with the sleeve of my blouse. I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep, something I had learned to do very well over the years. The steps on the stairs creaked under his weight. The smell of whiskey arrived even before he lit the dim light of the basement. "Have you learned your lesson for today, girl?" His voice was slurred from drinking. This could be good or very, very bad, depending on his mood. "Yes, Daddy," I replied in the most submissive voice I could manage. He stared at me for what seemed like an eternity, swaying slightly, his half-closed eyes evaluating me. Finally, he took the key to the handcuffs from his pocket and freed me. "Go up and prepare something for me to eat, and don't make me regret having been good to you today." I dragged myself up the stairs, hiding the pain with each step, my mother's diary firmly held between the waistband of my skirt and my skin. That book was now my only hope, my only weapon. In the days that followed, I lived in a state of constant alert. During the day, I continued to be the same submissive and quiet girl my father expected. I went to school, returned straight home, did my chores without complaining. But at night, when he fell asleep on the couch after bottles of whiskey, I planned. First, I found a new hiding place for my mother's diary, a loose board under my bed, where I already kept my own diary. There, the two books stayed together, hers telling the tragic past, mine recording the distressing present and plans for an uncertain future. Dorothy noticed the change in me, even though I tried to hide it. "You're different," she commented quietly during class. "Your eyes, they look like those of someone older." I didn't tell her everything, of course, but I let a few phrases slip out. Enough for her to understand the seriousness of the situation. "If someday I don't show up at school for more than 2 days, look for Miss Josephine," I said, trying to sound casual. "Tell her to go to my house with someone from the sheriff's office." Dorothy's eyes widened, but she just nodded without asking questions. That was what I admired most about her. She knew when not to ask. At home, the lessons continued. But now that I knew the truth, each of my father's words had a different meaning. When he said, "Your mother was weak, she couldn't take it," I understood what he really meant to say. When he threatened that I would end up like her if I didn't learn to obey, it wasn't a warning. It was a confession. The worst lesson happened a month after I found the diary. It was on a Saturday night, after he returned from the bar more drunk than usual. He had lost money in a card game and, as always, needed to take it out on someone. He found some excuse, I think it was a poorly ironed shirt, and dragged me to the basement. This time, the discipline was so severe I thought I wouldn't survive. Between the blows, he said disconnected things, mixing my name with my mother's, as if he didn't know anymore who he was punishing. "You thought you could leave me, Clara? Thought you could run away with the girl? Nobody leaves me, nobody." When he finally stopped, I fell onto the cold basement floor, semi-conscious. He left me there, not even bothering to handcuff me this time. Perhaps he thought I wouldn't have the strength to climb the stairs, and I almost didn't. But something inside me refused to give up. My mother's voice, through those diary pages, gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I crawled to the corner where the loose brick was, now my private hiding place, and pulled out a small broken mirror I had hidden days before. In the trembling reflection, I saw my face, swollen, with a cut on my eyebrow and a split lip. But what frightened me most were my eyes. They looked like my mother's eyes in the last photo we had of her. The eyes of someone who knew they needed to flee or die trying. It was that night, lying on the floor of that basement that had witnessed so much suffering, that I made my decision. I wouldn't try to escape like my mother. that had cost her life. I would confront the monster, and I would use the only weapon I had, the truth. 3 days after that terrible night in the basement, still with purple marks all over my body and pains that made me hold my breath at the slightest movement, I made the decision that would change everything. It was a Tuesday. I remember well because I had a math test at school. I went to class as always, maintaining that mask of normality that I had learned to wear so well. No one questioned much. Some girls whispered when I passed by. The teachers sometimes cast worried looks, but quickly looked away. In Pine Grove, in the 60s, what happened inside the home stayed inside the home. During the break, I found Dorothy behind the school building, our secret place where we shared stories and dreams. That time, however, there were no dreams to share. "I need you to keep this," I said, giving her a sealed envelope. Inside was a detailed letter about everything that happened in my house, along with the exact location of where I had hidden the 2 diaries, mine and my mother's. "If something happens to me, give this to Miss Josephine. Only to her, understand?" Dorothy took the envelope with trembling hands. "What are you going to do, Ellie?" She was the only one who called me that, an affectionate nickname that sounded strange in that moment loaded with fear. "I'm going to end this," I replied, with a calmness I didn't really feel. "One way or another." I returned home after school with a weight in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Daddy wasn't there, probably at the sawmill or already at the bar. I took the opportunity to get the diaries from their hiding place and put them under the mattress, more accessible for what was to come. I prepared dinner as always, rice, beans, and a piece of jerky sautéed with potatoes. The smell filled the small kitchen, but my stomach was so tight that the idea of eating anything made me nauseous. I set the table, arranged everything as he liked it, and waited. The creak of the gate announced his arrival shortly after sunset. I recognized from the sound of his footsteps that he had already stopped at the bar after work. He wasn't completely drunk, which was worse. In that intermediate state, he was more attentive, more cruel. "That smells good," he said as he entered, throwing his hat on the chair. His eyes examined me quickly, looking for something to criticize. "At least you know how to do one thing right." We sat at the table in silence. He ate with gusto, while I just pushed the food from one side of the plate to the other. My throat seemed closed by an invisible knot. "Aren't you going to eat?" he asked between one forkful and another. "Wasting food is disrespectful." "I'm not hungry," I replied softly. He dropped his fork forcefully on the plate, making a noise that made me shrink reflexively. "Not hungry? Do you have any idea how much it costs to put food on this table? Do you think money falls from the sky?" It always started like this. A small spark that he fed until it became an uncontrollable fire. Normally I would apologize, eat forcefully, do anything to appease him. But that night, something had changed inside me. "I found her diary," I said, the words coming out almost without my permission. Time seemed to freeze. He remained motionless, the fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes fixed on me as if he had seen a ghost. And in a way, he really had. "What are you talking about, girl?" His voice came out different, higher pitched, almost unrecognizable. "My mother's diary," I continued, feeling a tremor in my hands that I tried to hide under the table. "The one she wrote until the last day, until the hour when you dragged her to the basement." He dropped the fork, which fell with a metallic tinkle on the plate. His face went through several expressions in seconds: surprise, fear, anger, until it settled on a hard mask that I knew all too well. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, slowly rising from his chair. "Your mother died of tetanus. Everyone knows that." I also stood up, retreating a few steps toward my bedroom. It wasn't a retreat, it was strategy. "She wrote everything down, Daddy. How you treated her. How she tried to escape with me to Wheeling. How you found her packing things on that rainy day." He advanced toward me, his face contorted in a fury that made my blood freeze. "Where is this diary? Give it to me now." I ran to my bedroom, with him at my heels. I pulled my mother's diary from under the mattress and held it against my chest. "It's all here," I said, my voice trembling but determined. "Everything you did to her. Everything you've been doing to me." "Give me that." He advanced, trying to snatch the notebook from my hands, but I dodged. "If you do that, everyone will know," I shouted, with a courage I didn't know I possessed. "I made copies of the important parts. They're kept in a safe place. If anything happens to me, Miss Josephine will receive them, along with a letter from me telling everything." It was partially true. I hadn't made copies, but the letter with Dorothy contained enough details, and the diaries were mentioned in it. He stopped, panting, his bloodshot eyes scanning my face for some sign of a bluff. "You're lying," he said, but there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Want to risk it? The whole town will know what happens in this basement. What happened to my mother? Sheriff Daniels is friends with the school principal, did you know? He'll love to know the truth about the poor widower of Pine Grove." The mention of the sheriff made his face pale. Even in a small town where family matters were frequently ignored, a murder was another story. "Your mother was weak," he said, his voice now a hiss loaded with hatred. "She couldn't take the pressure. I just disciplined her like I did with you. It was an accident." "You killed her," I replied, surprised at the firmness in my voice. "And you've been torturing me ever since, in the same place where she died." There was a moment of tense silence, where only our heavy breathing filled the small room. Then, something unexpected happened. My father, that man who had always seemed a terrifying giant to me, crumbled. Not physically. He remained standing, imposing as always, but something in his eyes changed, like a light that goes out. "You don't understand," he muttered, running his hand through his already thinning hair. "She was going to leave me. She was going to take you. What would the men at the sawmill say? What would everyone say behind my back? There goes Arthur, the man whose wife abandoned him." At that instant, I saw my father as he really was. Not an invincible monster, but a pathetic, weak man, consumed by his own ego and wounded pride. A man who preferred to kill his wife rather than be abandoned by her. "I'm leaving here," I declared, still pressing the diary against my chest like a shield. "I'm going to Aunt Martha's house. If you try to stop me, if you come after me, I swear I'll give these diaries to the sheriff." He stared at me for a long time, his eyes now empty of any emotion I could recognize. Finally, he turned around and left the room without saying a word. I heard his heavy footsteps crossing the living room, the front door slamming, and then silence. I stood there, trembling from head to toe, not believing what had just happened. I had confronted my tormentor. I had looked into the face of the man who killed my mother and made him back down. But I knew I wasn't safe. Not yet. Quickly, I gathered some clothes and put in the minimum necessities. 2 changes of clothes, my mother's diary, my own diary, and Jenny the doll, the silent companion of so many nights of terror. I put everything in a cloth bag and left through the back of the house, running down the dirt road towards town. It was a full moon night, which made it easier to see the path. Even so, I stumbled several times, fear making me constantly look behind. Every shadow seemed to be my father coming to get me. Every noise from the woods made me freeze in terror. I arrived at Aunt Martha's house close to midnight, drenched in sweat, my feet bleeding from cuts on the stones along the way. I knocked on the door with all the strength I had, praying she was home and not at her friend's house where she sometimes slept. The light of a kerosene lamp lit up inside. I heard footsteps, and then her voice, frightened. "Who's there at this hour?" "It's me, Aunt, Eleanor." The door opened, revealing the sleepy and worried face of my aunt. "Child of God, what happened?" I fell into her arms, sobbing, unable to form coherent words. She pulled me inside, locked the door, and sat me in a chair in her small but welcoming kitchen. He, I tried to say between sobs. "Shh, breathe first," she said, placing a cup of cool water in my hands. Drink, calm down. I drank the water in big gulps, feeling my throat scratch from dryness and crying. When I finally managed to calm down a bit, I placed my mother's diary on the table. I found this, I said simply. Aunt Martha looked at the worn notebook, immediate recognition in her eyes. Where? In the basement, hidden behind a loose brick. She took the diary with trembling hands, opening it and recognizing her sister's handwriting. Tears began to roll down her wrinkled face as she read the first pages. I always knew, she murmured, more to herself than to me. I knew it couldn't have been just an accident. Your mother was so afraid of him. On the day she died, she had asked me to meet her at the bus stop. When she didn't show up, I went to your house, but your father said she had hurt herself, that the doctor was already there. He never let me see her properly at the wake. The coffin was closed. Her words confirmed everything. My mother's last escape plan, the meeting arranged with Aunt Martha, the closed coffin to hide the true causes of death. He killed her, I said, feeling an immense weight as I pronounced those words out loud. And now, when I confronted him with the diary, threatened to tell everyone, he what, my child? Aunt Martha held my hands, her anxious eyes fixed on mine. He didn't deny it. He said it was an accident, that he was just disciplining her, as he does with me. And then he left. He went away from the house. My aunt hugged me tightly, the familiar smell of her homemade lavender soap bringing me a comfort I hadn't felt in years. You're not going back to that house, she declared with surprising firmness for a woman always so sweet and calm. Never again. Tomorrow we're going to the sheriff's office with this diary. That night, I slept in the small back room of Aunt Martha's house, Jenny hugged against my chest, my body aching but my soul, for the first time in many years, feeling a light breeze of freedom. It wasn't the end of my ordeal, far from it, but it was the beginning of the end. Little did I know that my father, at that very moment, was sitting at the kitchen table of our house, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him, writing something on a yellowed piece of paper. A letter that would be found beside him the next morning, when the foreman from the sawmill, concerned about his absence at work, would go to our house and find him cold and motionless, with the old revolver still in his hand and a dark hole in his right temple. The basement had finally claimed its last victim. I could hardly sleep that night at Aunt Martha's house. Even with the door locked and the chair propped against the doorknob, a habit I carried for decades afterward, each creak of the wood made me sit up in bed, heart racing. Near dawn, I finally fell asleep, exhausted from so much crying. The noise at the door woke me with a start. My first thought was that Daddy had come to get me. I huddled against the wall, hugging Jenny tightly, when I heard Aunt Martha's voice broken by crying. Eleanor, my child, something happened. I opened the door to find my aunt with swollen eyes beside Sheriff Daniels. The big man who had always frightened me seemed smaller that morning, hat in hands, eyes lowered. Child, he began, clearing his throat. Your father was found early this morning. He did himself harm. The world seemed to slow down. The words arrived as if through water. Dead? Was all I could ask. The sheriff nodded, looking away. He left a letter, confessed everything. I didn't cry. I didn't feel relief or sadness. I felt nothing. An enormous emptiness like the sky above Pine Grove. While Aunt Martha sobbed, murmuring prayers for the soul of her brother-in-law, the same soul that had sent her sister to the grave, I just sat in the kitchen chair, my mother's diary still pressed against my chest. The following days passed like a blur. The funeral was quick, and few attended. The entire town was already commenting on the confession letter, about the diary, about the years of abuse I suffered. The same neighbors who pretended not to see the bruises now whispered as I passed by. Poor thing. This murmur of false compassion hurt me more than any belt. A week after the burial, Mr. James Porter, the only lawyer in town, called us to discuss what he called the estate, a word I learned that day. The house, the land, my father's few possessions, everything would be mine, his only heir. But I didn't want any of it. Every board in that house held a scream, every corner a terror. "Sell everything," I said to the lawyer's astonishment. "I want the money to leave here." Aunt Martha looked at me, startled. "But child, you're only 14. You can't go out there alone." That's when Dorothy entered the conversation. She had come to visit me every day since what happened, bringing her books to distract me, sitting by my side in silence when words failed. "My Aunt Elizabeth lives in Pittsburgh," she said. "She's a teacher at a school for young ladies. Maybe they can accept Eleanor there." That was the first ray of hope in such dark days. Pittsburgh, the big city that always seemed so distant and unreachable. A place where no one knew my story, where I could be just Eleanor, not the murderer's daughter or the basement girl. Aunt Martha resisted at first. "You can stay with me, Ellie. You don't have to go away." But I needed to. I needed new air, streets without memories, a sky that hadn't witnessed my suffering. "I need to go, Aunt. I can't breathe in this town." The sale of the house and goods was quicker than we expected. A merchant from Uniontown who wanted to expand his business bought everything without haggling, probably because of the discomfort of negotiating with an orphan. The money wasn't much, but enough for the ticket and a few months in the Pennsylvania capital. On the eve of my departure, I returned one last time to that house. Aunt Martha didn't understand why I wanted to go back, but she didn't stop me. "Just don't take long. The bus leaves early tomorrow." I walked alone down the dirt road. The sun was setting, tinting the sky blood red when I reached the worn wooden gate. The house seemed smaller somehow, less threatening. I entered without turning on the lights. I didn't need them to find my way. I went straight to the basement. Each step creaking under my feet made my heart accelerate with memories of terror. I lit the old kerosene lamp that still hung on the hook. The shadows danced on the damp walls like familiar ghosts. There, in the corner where the loose brick had revealed my mother's diary, I knelt and touched the packed dirt. "Mom," I whispered to the silence, "I'm leaving. I'm going to live the life you dreamed for me. I swear I'll never let anyone diminish me again." I took from the bag I carried a small box of matches. Carefully, I struck one and watched the small flame flicker. It would be so easy to let it fall there, on that old wooden floor. So easy to see everything turn to ashes. But no. My father's death had already closed a cycle. Starting another with destruction wouldn't bring peace. I extinguished the match, put the box in my pocket, and climbed the stairs. In the room that had been mine for so many years, I left just one thing: Jenny the doll sitting on the bare mattress. My silent witness would stay behind, keeping within those walls the stories I would take with me. The next morning, under a sky washed by the night's storm, I boarded the bus with a small suitcase of clothes, the 2 diaries hidden at the bottom, and an envelope with the money from the sale sewn into the lining of my coat. Aunt Martha's idea, always practical. The big city has a lot of tricksters, child. Dorothy and her mother accompanied me to the bus station. Mrs. Johnson, who had never been very close, hugged me with surprising strength. "Write when you arrive," she asked, wiping away a tear. "Let us know you're okay." Dorothy, my only friend, gave me a package wrapped in brown paper. "Only open it when you're on the road," she said, her voice breaking. We hugged for a long time, without words. We never needed many of them. Aunt Martha cried copiously, alternating between practical advice and blessings. "Be careful with men," she warned, adjusting my hair for the 10th time. "And never go to sleep without saying the Lord's Prayer." When the bus finally departed, I kept looking out the window until the 3 figures became just dots in the distance. Pine Grove was left behind, with its secrets, pains, and scars. Before me, an unknown and terrifying world, but mine to explore. Only then did I open Dorothy's package. It was a book of poetry by Robert Frost and a note. For when your own words fail, use his. One day, you will write your own. Your friend forever. ... I cried then, for the first time since my father's death. Not for him, not for the past, but for the possibilities that opened before me like the endless horizon through the bus window. The journey to Pittsburgh was long and exhausting. 3 days of potholed roads, stops at dusty bus stations, nights poorly slept on uncomfortable benches during transfers. But each mile took me away from the basement, from the handcuffs, from the night screams. Each jolt of the bus shook away a bit of the fear I carried on my girl's shoulders. When I finally arrived in the Pennsylvania capital in March 1962, the shock was immense. I had never seen so many buildings, so many cars, so many hurried people. The noise was deafening for someone accustomed to the oppressive silence of Pine Grove. I got lost twice before finding the address of Dorothy's aunt, written on a crumpled paper in my pocket. Miss Elizabeth didn't look anything like her niece. She was a tall, thin woman with a severe expression and impeccable posture. But her eyes had the same kindness when she received me at the door of the small apartment in downtown. "So you're Eleanor," she said, examining me from head to toe. "Dorothy told me your story. Part of it, at least." Her gaze settled on the now yellowish bruises on my arms, visible despite the coat. "Welcome to your new life, child." And that's how I started over. Miss Elizabeth managed to enroll me at St. Margaret's Girls' School, where she taught literature. Not as a boarding student, the school was for girls from wealthy families, but under a special arrangement, as a social case, a term I only understood years later. I rented a small room in Mrs. Wilson's boarding house, a Scottish lady who treated all her boarders like daughters. "Such a young girl alone in the world," she would repeat, while serving me another ladle of soup. "You have to eat to get strong." The money from the sale of the house lasted little more than 6 months. Soon, I needed to find work. I began washing dishes at a bakery near the school after classes. The owner, Sophia, a loud-voiced Italian-American with an even bigger heart, soon noticed my interest in the recipe books. "Do you want to learn how to make sweets, girl?" she asked one day as I was drying the pans, looking fascinated at the cakes coming out of the oven. "I can teach you if you want." It was my first real opportunity for choice, to do something because I wanted to, not out of fear or obligation. "Yes, I do, Mrs. Sophia. Very much." At 16, I was making the best chocolate truffles in the bakery. At 17, I had my own showcase of sweets. The money wasn't much, but it allowed me to pay for the boarding house and save a little. In my spare hours, I continued to study voraciously. Miss Elizabeth, seeing my thirst for knowledge, lent me books I would never have had access to otherwise. It was she who also encouraged me to take the entrance exam for the Faculty of Letters. "You have a talent with words, Eleanor. Don't waste it." In 1966, at 19, I entered the University of Pittsburgh, the first in my family to set foot in a higher education institution. I worked during the day at the bakery, studied at night, slept few hours. But each page turned, each good grade, each praise from the professors was a victory against the ghost of my father, who still sometimes visited me in nightmares. It was at college that I met Henry. He was an assistant professor of American literature, only 8 years older than me, but with a wisdom in his eyes that captivated me from the first day. Unlike other men, he never tried to impress me. He talked with me about books, poems, ideas, as if I were equal to him, something I had never experienced. Our first meeting was at a cafe near the university to discuss a paper on Emily Dickinson. We talked until the place closed. When he accompanied me to the bus stop, he didn't try to touch me, didn't invade my space. He just asked, "Can we continue this conversation another day?" We continued for months. Meetings in cafes, walks through the historic center, entire afternoons in the library. He was always respectful, patient, attentive to my invisible boundaries. I was distrustful, waiting for the mask to fall, the monster to appear, as had happened with my father. On a particularly cold winter night, after accompanying me to the boarding house, Henry held my hand for the first time. A touch so light I almost didn't feel it through the wool gloves. "Eleanor," he said, with that calm voice that calmed me inside, "I think I'm falling in love with you." I froze. The fear, that old acquaintance, rose up my spine. I pulled my hand away, stepped back. "You don't really know me," I replied, my voice trembling. "Then let me know you," he asked, without advancing, respecting my distance. "Your past, your fears, your dreams, everything." That night, in the quiet kitchen of the boarding house, while everyone slept, I told him. Everything. The basement, the lessons, my mother's diary, my father's death. I showed him the scars, not just the visible ones on my wrists, where the handcuffs bit, but the invisible ones, those I carried in my soul. Henry cried, not out of pity, but out of anger, indignation for what I had lived through. When I finished, he didn't try to hug me, didn't offer empty words of consolation. He just said, "Thank you for trusting me with your story. You are the bravest person I have ever met." We married in 1968. It was a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by a lunch at the bakery where I still worked. Aunt Martha came from Pine Grove, aged but with the same kind eyes. Dorothy was there with her fiancé, a young man from Wheeling whom she had met in college. Miss Elizabeth, proud as if I were her daughter. Mrs. Wilson, crying more than everyone. Mrs. Sophia commanding the kitchen, ensuring everything came out perfect. Our apartment was small, but full of books and natural light. In the first months, I would wake up startled in the middle of the night, confused about being in a safe place, frightened by the presence of someone beside me. Henry never complained. He would just turn on the bedside lamp, offer me water, patiently wait for the storm inside me to pass. In 1970, I graduated in literature and began teaching at a state school. The following year, I started a master's in American literature. In 1972, something I never imagined possible. I discovered I was pregnant. The fear was immediate and overwhelming. What kind of mother would I be with all my scars? How could I protect a child when I couldn't protect myself? Henry held my trembling hands that night when I told the news, the positive test still on the kitchen table. "Eleanor," he said, with that quiet certainty that always anchored me, "you will be an extraordinary mother exactly because you know what it is to grow up without love. You will never, ever repeat your father's mistakes." Our son William was born on a rainy dawn in March 1973. When they placed him in my arms, so small, so fragile, I made a silent vow. You will never know the fear I knew. Never. That same year, the ghost of my past knocked on the door one last time. A letter from Pine Grove, from the new sheriff, informed that during a renovation of my old house, they had found human bones buried in the basement, under the floorboards. Bones of an adult woman. My mother's body, hidden all those years beneath my feet, while my father shouted that she had been buried in the municipal cemetery. Another lie unmasked, another horror revealed. I collapsed in Henry's arms, crying all the tears I had kept inside. I didn't return for the official burial. I couldn't step in that town again. Aunt Martha took care of everything, and finally my mother received the funeral honors she deserved. And I, with my baby in my arms and my husband by my side, performed my own farewell ritual in Pittsburgh. I lit a candle, read some pages from her diary, and finally let her go. Life went on. We had 2 more children, Sarah in 1975 and Michael in 1978. I bought my own bakery, specializing in fine desserts for events. Henry became a tenured professor of literature. We built a life that, in my most desperate moments in the basement of Pine Grove, I never believed would be possible. The pain never completely disappeared, Some wounds are too deep to fully heal. But I learned to live with the scars, to honor them as part of my story of survival. And when the weight of the memories became too great, I began to write. First, just for myself, in notebooks I kept in the drawer of my desk. Then, encouraged by Henry, fictional stories that, somehow, always reflected fragments of my own journey. Until, at 50, I published my first book, a novel about a girl who finds freedom through words. My mother's diary remained with me, kept in a small cedar box that Henry gave me as a present on our 10th wedding anniversary. I didn't read it often. Some pages were too painful. But its presence was a constant reminder of the truth that saved me, of the courage my mother had, and that somehow she passed on to me. In 1997, when William gave me my first grandchild, Benjamin, something definitively healed inside me. Holding that baby, seeing my son be the loving father I never had, I felt that the cycle of pain had finally been broken. That night, I cried in Henry's arms, not out of sadness, but out of deep gratitude for the life we had built together, for the family that was growing in love, not in fear. Today, sitting in this rocking chair in my study in Millfield, looking out the window at the blooming yellow tulips in the yard, sometimes I wonder if that frightened girl from the basement could imagine the woman I became. I came to this little Kentucky town almost 10 years ago, in 2016. It was after Henry passed away, taken by a massive heart attack while sleeping. 48 years together, an entire life shared, and in a breath, he was gone. No goodbyes, no last words. Just the silence of a Sunday morning and the empty side of the bed. Grief was a different abyss from anything I had faced before. The pain of the basement was sharp, cutting like broken glass. Henry's absence was an infinite void, a constant lack that made the air too thin to breathe. Our apartment in Pittsburgh, once so welcoming, became a museum of memories that suffocated me. It was my daughter Sarah who suggested the move. She had married a doctor who received an offer to direct the small hospital in Millfield. "Come with us, Mom," she insisted. "A new place, a chance to start over." Starting over at 68 seemed crazy. But when you've survived what I survived, when you've faced your own hell and come out of it to tell the story, maybe madness is just one more step in the journey. I sold the apartment and the bakery in Pittsburgh. I bought this house with a wide porch and generous garden, 10 minutes by car from Sarah's house. I brought only the essentials, my books, some mementos, and the cedar box with my mother's diary. At first, the silence of this house frightened me. After decades in the bustle of Pittsburgh, the slow rhythm of Millfield seemed almost unreal. The nights were too dark, the mornings too quiet. I spent weeks just existing, moving through the house like a ghost, going to Sarah's house for Sunday lunch, watching my grandchildren grow, without really participating in life. It was Benjamin, my oldest grandson, now a 28-year-old man, a history teacher, who brought me back. During one of his visits, he brought a dusty box he had found in his parents' attic. "Grandma, I found your old manuscripts," he said, placing it on the kitchen table. "Why did you stop writing after the third book?" I looked at those yellowed notebooks, drafts of what could have been unfinished stories. "Life happened, son," I replied, running my hand over the covers. "After your grandfather got sick, I couldn't find the words anymore." Benjamin looked at me with those eyes that so much reminded me of Henry's. The same curiosity, the same gentleness. Maybe it's time to find them again. That night, after he left, I sat on the porch looking at the stars, so bright here, away from the big city lights. I thought about everything I had lived through, the stories I carried inside me, not just mine, but my mother's, Aunt Martha's, Dorothy's, all the women who crossed my path and helped me survive. The next morning, I bought a new notebook. I sat at this same desk where I am now and began to write. Not fiction this time, but memoirs. The raw and brutal truth of the basement girl. The words came like a flood, a river dammed up for decades finally breaking through. I wrote for days, for weeks. I slept few hours and returned to the notebook as if afraid the memories would escape if I didn't capture them quickly. When I finished the first draft, I showed it only to Sarah. She read it in 2 days, crying so much that her eyes became swollen. "Mom," she said, holding my hands, "this needs to be published. Other people need to read this story." The process was frightening, exposing my deepest pain, revealing secrets kept for decades, feeling vulnerable again. But something had changed in me. The terrified girl had transformed into a 70-year-old woman who no longer had anything to fear. The Basement Diary was published the following year, 2019, by a small publisher in Louisville. I didn't expect much. After all, who would be interested in an old woman's story about childhood traumas? But the book touched people in a way I never imagined. Letters began to arrive, emails, messages on social media that my grandchildren manage for me. Women of all ages sharing their own stories of abuse, of silence, of survival. Men thanking me for helping them understand mothers, sisters, wives who carried invisible wounds. "Your courage gave me courage," wrote a 19-year-old girl from a small town in West Virginia that barely appears on maps. "If you survived that basement, I can survive mine." That's when I understood that my story wasn't just mine. It was a light for others who still wandered in their own metaphorical basements, trapped by invisible handcuffs of fear, shame, or guilt. I've published 2 more books since then. My editor, August, an enthusiastic young man with thick glasses, says I'm creating a new genre, healing memoirs. I'm invited to speak at schools, at colleges, even at specialized police stations for women's care. The first few times I spoke in public, I trembled so much I had to sit down. My voice failed, my hands sweated, but each time I told my story, it lost a bit of its power over me. Each time someone thanked me with tears in their eyes, I felt the basement getting more distant, its walls crumbling a little more. Today, at 78, I have a peaceful and rewarding routine. I wake up early, make my coffee, and come to this study, where I spend a few hours writing. Sometimes they're memoirs for a new book, sometimes they're responses to readers who write to me, sometimes they're just reflections for myself. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I teach literature at the Millfield Community Center. The classes are small, mainly older women who, like me, are rediscovering words in maturity. We teach each other. They show me wildflowers I never knew, recipes passed down through generations. I show them the liberating power of writing. On Sunday afternoons, the house fills with noise. Sarah comes with her husband Robert and the children who still live with them. Jessica and Matthew, the youngest. Benjamin appears with his wife Rachel, pregnant with my first great-grandchild. William and his family come from Cincinnati when they can. Michael, who lives in California, visits twice a year, and we make weekly video calls. We prepare festive lunches on the porch under the shade of the apple tree I planted when I moved in. We laugh, discuss politics, talk about books, plan trips. The big table is covered with dishes and pitchers of lemonade. The children run around the yard, inventing games that make me remember the childhood I never had, but that I could give to my children. I look at all of them, my children, daughters-in-law, son-in-law, grandchildren, and feel a gratitude that overflows. This is my true triumph over the basement, this family built with love, respect, and kindness. 3 generations who never knew the terror I knew, who grew up knowing they are unconditionally loved. At night, when everyone leaves and the house returns to silence, I sit on this porch with a cup of tea. Sometimes I leaf through my mother's diary, no longer with pain, but with a kind of reverence. Those stained pages are no longer just a record of horror, but a testimony of resistance. Through them, my mother saved me, even after death. Through them, I found not only the truth, but my own path to freedom. The scars are still here, thin white lines on the wrists where the handcuffs cut, invisible marks on the soul that sometimes hurt on stormy nights. But I've learned that scars aren't just memories of pain. They're proof of healing, maps of the journey we've traveled. Dorothy is still in my life, even at a distance. She lives in Boston now, a widow like me. We talk on the phone every week, laugh at the same jokes, share the small victories and defeats of old age. I never forgot that it was she who gave me my first diary, who planted the seed of writing that decades later would become my salvation. Aunt Martha passed away many years ago, but her spirit remains with me. On mornings when I wake up with aches in my joints, I make the chamomile tea she taught me. When my grandchildren have nightmares, I tell the stories she told me about guardian angels who watch over our sleep. Sometimes, when the wind blows in a specific way through the leaves of the apple tree, I hear my mother's voice, no longer in desperate screams, but in whispers of pride. "You did it, my daughter," she seems to say. "You broke the chain." And yes, I broke it. Fear no longer defines me. The basement no longer possesses me. I am Eleanor Matthews, writer, mother, grandmother, survivor. My story began in the shadows, but continues in the light. And as long as I have breath, I will continue to tell it, not just for what it was, but for what it can mean to others who are still struggling to find their own voice in the dark. My dear friends, we're coming to the end of this conversation, this story that I kept inside me for so long. If you're watching until here, perhaps you found something of your own story in mine. Perhaps you too know the walls of some basement, real or metaphorical. I want to look directly at you, who are on the other side of this screen, and say, you are not alone. Your pain is real, your struggle is legitimate, and your liberation is possible. For a long time, I believed I was weak for being afraid, for crying in the dark, for trembling at the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Today, I know that surviving requires a strength that few understand. If you're breathing, despite everything, you're already a warrior. If I may, I'd like to share some truths I've learned along this journey. Your history does not determine your destiny. The basement may be part of your past, but it doesn't need to be part of your future. You are much more than the worst things that happen to you. The shame is not yours to carry. It belongs to those who caused the pain, not to who suffered it. Return this burden. It was never yours. Seek help. Accept extended hands. My Aunt Martha, Dorothy, Miss Elizabeth, I wouldn't have survived without them. Somewhere, there is someone ready to hear your truth without judgment. Your voice is your most powerful weapon. When I finally spoke the truth, the invisible handcuffs began to break. The darkness fears your voice more than you fear the darkness. Every small step counts. Some days, just getting out of bed is a victory. Celebrate each battle won, no matter how small it seems. Forgiveness is not mandatory. I never forgave my father for what he did to my mother, to me. And that's okay. Healing doesn't require you to absolve those who destroyed parts of you. You deserve a life beyond survival. Not just to exist, but to live fully with joy, love, laughter. This too is resistance. Your pain can transform into purpose. When I shared my story, I discovered it could illuminate the path for others. Your scars can become maps of hope for those still lost. You are not what they did to you. You are what you choose to do with what remains, with each dawn, with each new chance. I look back today and see that frightened girl in the basement, clutching her doll, trembling in the dark. I wish I could hug her and say, "It's going to be okay. One day, you will be free. One day, you will be strong. One day, you will be sitting on a porch, surrounded by love, telling your story not with shame, but with pride for having survived." If you are living your own hell now, know that there is an after. There is a tomorrow where this pain will be just a part of your story, not all of it. Where you will breathe without fear, where smiling won't be an effort, where life will have colors again. If you like this story, please click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to receive more videos like this one. Share with someone who might need to hear that there's hope beyond the basement. And if you can, leave in the comments the word freedom, so I know you got this far, that you heard my story to the end. And always remember, as long as there's breath in your chest, there's the possibility of a new beginning. The last page of your story has not yet been written, and the diary, the one that reveals the truth and opens paths to liberation, is in your own hands. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening to me, for witnessing my journey, for reminding me that sharing our truth is perhaps the most courageous act we can perform in this life.